Mitraya Namaha. Mitrotrih Paurisheyotha Takshako Manakaha Rataswana iti hyete Shukramasam Nayantyami. Mitra as the sun god, Atri as the sage, Paurusheya as the Rakshasa, Takshaka as the Naga, Menaka as the Apsara, Haha as the Gandharva, and Rataswana as the Yaksha rule the month of Shukra. Namaste everyone. So today's video is going to be about Sun in the sign of Gemini, or Sun in the third house, which assumes the form of Mitra Aditya. So on our sky, Sun is still in the very last degrees in the sign of Gemini, and it's actually a very special place for the Sun to be in, because astrologically it's actually right before the Dakshinayana starts. So astronomically Dakshinayana has already started, but astrologically we are traditionally saying that Dakshinayana, the spiritual one, starts when the Sun enters the sign of Cancer. Why? Because when the Sun enters the sign of Cancer, the zodiacal third eye chakra, from then on, it slowly starts to move down. So also our energy in our energy body slowly starts to move down. So specifically in our times, when actually this peak of energy is happening in the very center of the sign of Gemini, when summer solstice is happening, the sign of Gemini holds a very special importance, you know. And sign of Gemini in itself is quite interesting place for the Sun to be in, because it's an airy sign, while the Sun itself is fiery in nature. And air is always fueling the fire. So it's actually a very powerful position for the sign to be in. Also, it is said that the Gemini is actually the Uchamsha of the Sun. What does it mean? Simply, you know, when the Sun is exalted in the sign of Aries, right, at its max exaltation degree, it actually goes to the sign of Gemini in Navamsha. This is what we mean when we say that Gemini is also Uchamsha of the Sun. Which is why Sun in the third house or in the sign of Gemini is very powerful. It has lots of light, you know. It's actually literally say that Mitra Aditya himself has bright complexion. He's very effulgent. He has loads of light. Even in the Rig Veda you can say many comparisons actually that they are saying, they are comparing Agnidev himself, the god of fire, to Mitra. They are saying so many times in the Rig Veda, O Agni, O fire god, in your effulgence, in your brilliance, you are similar to Mitra. So also Mitra Aditya, especially when the Sun is in the third house or in the sign of Gemini, actually can sometimes physically give a bright complexion to the person too. But Sun in this special position is also bringing many other qualities, and we are going to talk about it today. So the third house in Vedic astrology, it's a house of friends, house of siblings, house of communication also. So just to cut it in short, it's actually the house of connection. How do we connect with things in our life? That's the actual third house. And sign of Gemini also has a lot to do with that, you know, because it's the house or the sign ruled by Mercury, right? And Mercury is all about this communication and our ability to connect to life itself. This is why the color of Mercury is also green, right? It's the color of life, it's the color of nature, actually. And the very specific thing about the sign of Gemini, its very name, Mithuna, in Sanskrit, means actual coupling, copulation, mating. So in our Western culture we often say that actually sign of Gemini is the house of twins, right? The sign of twins. But in Sanskrit, if you literally take the name of Mithuna, Mithuna means actually coupling. So it's a couple, it's a male and female. So it's all about connecting different opposites, all about certain opposites coming together. So also people who have Sun in the third house or Sun in the sign of Gemini, usually we would say that these people should have tremendous ability when it comes to connection, right? But one important thing is that Sun is actually the separator, which is why for these people actually making connection with certain things in their life, with certain people in their life, might be challenging. You can actually see many times people who have Sun in the third house or Sun in the sign of Gemini, that they might have very little amount of friends. They might be very alone actually in life. And why is that so? Because Sun has this burning quality. And specifically Sun in Gemini, he's the most powerful. He has the biggest amount of light, like literally our days are the longest when the Sun is dwelling in the sign of Gemini. So this is why Sun is slightly burning, this ability to connect to different things in our life. And this is why also Sun is called Mitra here, the divine friend, because he acts as a remedy. When you pray to the Sun god in the form of Mitra, he actually helps you to connect to things more, He helps you to heal your relations, either with your friends or with your siblings, because these are like the two relations which might suffer the most when the Sun is in the third house. And it also, helps you to heal your relation towards life itself too. Sun in the sign of Gemini and the third house also has a lot to do with attraction. Generally, the third house and the sign of Gemini has actually a lot to do with attraction as well. How can we attract things into our life? How do we interact with them? It's also our thinking process too. So this is a very interesting thing too, because if you look, if you remember this first verse about which we were talking, just before the start of this video, the Apsara residing in the chariot of the Sun, when the Sun is dwelling in the sign of Gemini, is Menaka. And she's said to be the most beautiful of all Apsaras, the most beautiful of all heavenly ladies who enchanted so many gods, So also Sun in the third house, or Sun in the sign of Gemini, can bring this effulgence, can actually bring also external beauty from the person as well. But can also make the person, sometimes a little bit fickle, and changeable when it comes to relations, And it's not only when it comes to like partnerships, very often it can manifest actually as changing friends very often too, So that's a very specific quality with the Sun in the third house or Sun in the Gemini. But again, it doesn't need to be. Because if, let's say, your Sun is in the third house, but if a very restrictive sign or very loyal sign, this quality won't manifest that much. But specifically Sun in Gemini can bring this quality out of the person. Like the person might really try many different relationships, either in friendship or in partner relationships in life, before the person actually settles down. Because it's still very airy sign, and this air fuels, the inner fire of the Sun. So it also fuels a little bit, this fire of passion in a way. And because the sign of Gemini is also zodiacal throat chakra, the third house and the sign of Gemini in general has a lot to do with the way we communicate. And as you know, the Sun is the truth, Sun is the light of the truth. And Sun in this specific placement in the sign of Gemini or in the third house can actually sometimes, have this interesting tendency to speak truth, a little bit too directly, These are the sort of people who might tell you the truth without any regard whether it will hurt you or not. And this is actually one of the reasons why sometimes these people may end up having very little amount of friends, because not everybody resonates with this quality from them. So they can be a little bit impulsive in speech as well, they might not think before actually saying something. Again, due to this very, very fiery nature there of the Sun being present. So this is one thing they definitely need to kind of work more on, to kind of cool this inner fire, especially manifested in their throat chakra, in their speech, and to control a little bit more what they are saying, to what people they are saying, and to actually really develop the qualities of Mitra Aditya, right? Mitra Aditya is said to be like one of the most benevolent actually forms of the Sun god, because he's the Sun god who is the divine friend of the entire universe, So this is actually the quality they need to kind of try to develop. And it's very special because you see even the rishi, the sage, dwelling in the chariot of the Sun god when he's dwelling in the sign of Gemini, is Sage Atri, who is the father of the moon, right? And moon is also, again, this planet who wants to be friends with everybody. So it's also like a silent indication towards people who are having this Sun in the third house or in the sign of Gemini, that they need to try to be a little bit more friendly, a little bit more kind, and a little bit more gentle in the way they talk to others, connect to others, and interact with others. People with Sun in the sign of Gemini or in the third house can be actually great translators, you know. They can take this divine knowledge or inspiration that comes to them and actually translate it in the language understandable to other people. Which is why you will see actual translators with this placement, actual journalists, you know, people who kind of, you know, take the information, you know, the inspiration from Sun and Moon, and they transform it, translate it through their Mercury, you know, into something manifested to the world. So also brilliant writers can be found with this placement, because really what the planet Mercury is doing, he's literally translating, right? He's literally translating the messages or the inspiration from the Sun into the world. This is why Mercury is the planet who's actually the closest to the Sun, right? He's like this divine messenger of the Sun, even in Greek tradition. This is exactly what Mercury is doing. And even if you think about it, that actually the green color is the color of Mercury. Like, what is the green color? What is the green color in the plants, in the nature? It's the actual chlorophyll, right? It's the actual substance which takes the light of the Sun and translates it into life. So this is also how healthy Mercury should behave, you know. He should take this inspiration of the burning Sun and try to translate it into life. Try to translate it into something gentle, beautiful and growing. And this is also how healthy Sun in the third house or healthy Sun in the sign of Gemini would behave. However, if this Sun, you know, is receiving some sort of difficult aspects or is in some very difficult position, it may, you know, obstruct this ability to translate things. So often actually, if you will see sometimes in some charts of some people that Sun is in this third house, and he's in the sign of Gemini, but in some disturbing company, like in the company, sometimes the company of Ketu, for example, it can happen, or other disturbing planets, you can really see that these people have actual problem with expressing what they want to say and translating it into the language understandable to other people. Like, they can have many brilliant ideas, you know, but they might simply find this difficulty with actually expressing them. So when Sun is in the sign of Gemini or in the third house, it also brings lots of inspiration. So these people usually are very inspired. They might have many brilliant ideas actually, sometimes too many even, you know, for them to handle. But they're very inspired, very creative people, can be extremely talented too, you know, especially if it happens in some nakshatras which are already very talented and very, you know, creative also in that way. So you can really see that these people are very inspired and can have many different talents. Specifically Sun, you see, Sun is very strongly connected with music. So you can see musicians actually with the Sun in the third house, especially in some exact portions of this third house or in the sign of Gemini. So musicians definitely, sometimes singers too, or people who creatively use their voice to actually express something. So also great public speakers at the same time. So these are people who definitely can have lots and lots of this creativity, and this creativity can also bring them actual fame in life as well. So because third house, as well as the sign of Gemini, is so strongly connected to relations, friendships, you know, siblings, it can really be that these people can have actually problems with that sometimes. Even though the Sun in this placement is called Mitra, or the divine friend, but still, you know, Sun is very burning, you know. Sun is actually the self, right? This is why Sun is debilitated in the 7th house, or in the sign of Libra. He's debilitated in the place where he actually needs to lower himself and sacrifice some part of himself in order to maintain a relationship. So also in the 3rd house, you know, Sun is causing loneliness sometimes. And there's actually a beautiful story about Mitra Aditya, you know, and his sacrifice for the friendship with the world, when he was doing a tapasya, a penance, on the top of the mountain Chandrabhaga. It's actually written in Brahma Purana, when he was doing this tapasya in order to bring healing, you know, to the world, actually. And until today, actually, if you go to the very special place, which is called Chandrabhaga in India, people are actually getting healed. So people who actually have this placement especially Sun in Gemini, not that much even Sun in the third house, but Sun in Gemini can also bring a person some healing abilities, because Mercury is also very, very strongly connected with healing. But still, if you have yourself Sun in the third house or Sun in the sign of Gemini, very important thing for you is to take a little bit better and a little bit more conscious, care of your relationships and your friendships if you want to even have them in life. Because sometimes you can see that people who have Sun in the third house, they don't even need that much of a friend, they don't need even that much of social interaction very often. It's very interesting because very often we actually misjudge very easily Sun in the sign of Gemini as being this very social sign, but it really often is not. At least this is my humble observation, because when Sun is entering, such a social sign, and Sun is the self, Sun is the individuality, it's kind of, like these relationships are burnt to a certain extent. It's true the person may still meet lots of people, either due to person's work or due to traveling very often as well. So many, many different people, changing around the person all the time. But if you ask the person about like some sort of true friendships which the person has in life, you will see that the person will say that either she or he has very few amount of friends, or sometimes even no friends at all, or simply doesn't need that much of social interaction. So because the sign of a Gemini is also so-called Uchamsha of the Sun, and also because of the fact that actually third house also symbolizes, our expression in the world actually. Very often how people will see you and perceive you in the world is not your first house, it's actually your third house, because people actually perceive you through the way you communicate with them, through what you're doing in life, where your efforts are flowing, right? So this is how people actually perceive your image as well. And this is why people with the Sun in the third house or with the Sun in the sign of Gemini can actually sometimes be perceived as quite self-centered or even selfish sometimes, even if it's not always true. But it's very true though that these people are very focused on themselves, actually. They are much more focused on, let's say, what they receive or what is comfortable for them rather than on other people's needs. That is very true, because Sun in this place, Sun in the third house is really much more focused on the self, on shining its own light into the world, So often you can also see people who can be very strong personalities, especially, if Sun is in some strong degrees or strong nakshatras. You can see really strong personalities with that, really great public speakers, people who have a great self-confidence as well, And this is why it can kind of lead sometimes to loneliness in a way, paradoxically, because, even though these people can very easily attract fame and other people to them, very often when they actually need help in life, they might have nobody around them, actually. So this is a very interesting thing too, because we need to remember that third house is also the house of our own efforts. So literally Sun in this place is inspiring the person to put more effort into things. And these are also the people who most likely will actually do something alone. They won't necessarily ask for help, because Sun again is this individuality. Sun is this I. So what is important with this placement is to again take care of this I, and not make it grow too much, because otherwise it can really burn or overshadow your relations as well. But at the same time, don't run away from taking effort. And don't run away from making things alone like the universe is pushing you to do, because it's also your dharma in most cases to actually do the things alone in your life. People with the Sun in the third house or in the sign of Gemini have also powerful intellectual energy, actually. And not only because Mercury is the ruler, of the sign of Gemini, but also it's often said that Rahu is actually exalted here. So I am aware that different traditions of Jyotisha, different traditions of Vedic astrology will give you slightly different places of exaltation of the nodes, but very often it's also said that actually Rahu is exalted in Gemini. And even if we take away that fact, actually in the very heart of the sign of Gemini is Ardra Nakshatra, Rahu's powerful nakshatra, very mental nakshatra, very intellectual one, very much in the head. And this is why even the symbol of this nakshatra is actually the head of a person. And this is why for these people who have Sun in the third house or Sun in the sign of Gemini, and if you have that placement, important thing is to spend a little bit less time in your head, because actually Sun in this placement will make a person to spend too much time in the head, which is why it's so important for these people to spend a sufficient amount of their time in nature or doing yoga, grounding themselves in any way. People with the Sun in the third house or the Sun in the sign of Gemini can be also extremely innovative, Due to the influence of Mercury and due to the influence of Rahu, they can be also interested in modern technology, and they generally like, progress. They like evolution. They like like we are saying, like when something is happening, because it's the Aries sign, it likes when things are changing and exchanging themselves. But one thing which is kind of challenging a little bit with that placement is that sometimes, they might be so preoccupied either with their own progress or evolution, or their invention or their work or whatever they are doing, that they stop paying attention to their environment actually. That they lose also, some sort of environmental awareness on the way. And this is also due to the fact that actually the Naga or the serpent presiding in the chariot of the sun god during this exact month when the sun dwells in the sign of Gemini is called Takshaka, You might remember Takshaka actually from Mahabharata. He was this, divine, let's say, magician, or some sort of serpent, but he also had these Asuric traits, He wanted a progress for the sake of progress only sometimes as well. So he was all about these different, inventions, and he was all about innovation, but sometimes the price for this innovation and inventions was very, very high. So also for people in the Sun in the third house and Sun in the sign of Gemini, it's very important for them that they make sure that their own work, their own innovation, their own focus, what they focus their solar energy on, actually doesn't hurt others in some way, especially their friends or people who are close to them, or their environment as well. So for these people, it's very important to have some sort of environmental awareness. However, usually, actually in time, for the people with Sun in the third house especially, it actually occurs kind of naturally, that they start to be environmentally more aware. And actually you can even see that after some time, when they grow up, get more years, they are much more interested, in recycling with things which are ecological and environmentally friendly as well. But again, it depends where exactly the sun is placed, which nakshatra, which degree of this exact sign or house. People with Sun in the third house or Sun in the sign of Gemini can usually also very easily, focus on their goal as well. Very often you will actually see people who are very confident about what they actually want in life. They have this clarity. Obviously, unless, the Sun is conjunct with some more confusing planets, specifically Rahu, Ketu, sometimes the Moon also, then, this influence can be slightly more confused. But usually people with Sun in the third house or sign of Gemini are kind of naturally confident. And they're very focused on their goal too. But again, sometimes when they are just focused on their goal and heading towards their goal, making their effort towards their goal, they need to be careful that they don't sacrifice too much. They have this ability to actually sacrifice themselves for a higher purpose. Because third house is also the house of our efforts, also the house of our focus. So they have this capacity, to sacrifice themselves for something higher than them, especially with Sun there in the third house, because Sun is the soul, is this divine inspiration, it's also this I. But they need to be really careful that they actually don't sacrifice others, or that with their own actions, again, while heading towards their goals, that they simply, do not play hardball in a way. Because they may have these tendencies sometimes as well, especially if something is really important for them. People with Sun in the third house or in the sign of Gemini are usually also quite fond of traveling, because the sign of Gemini specifically is a dual sign, it's Aries sign as well, so there's lots of movement happening there. These people usually also need lots of movement, especially Sun in the sign of Gemini. Not even that much in the third house, but Sun in Gemini might be actually interested, in lots of movement, not only in terms of traveling, but even like doing some sports, and things like that. They really have this energy, unless the sun is like really weak, or if it's again in some restrictive sign, then it might not manifest that much for these people. But Sun in Gemini may really bring that about. So these people might often need lots of stimulation, lots of changes in their life. And even if you look at their life, especially in the beginning of their life, it's often like, they are kind of unsettled, They might change the place where they live also very often and things like that. Because they sometimes simply need this additional time to really find, some sort of peace, to actually exhaust this energy of the sun and to finally realize, that if they will just keep moving all the time, if they will just keep changing things all the time, or if they will keep working too much, because you can definitely see some sort of workaholism with that placement too sometimes, they will just exhaust themselves. And with years they start to understand that slowly and they become a little bit more settled. And because Mitra, is this form of the sun god, when the sun is in the Gemini or in the third house, these people, even though they can be sometimes a little bit impulsive, they are actually quite peace-loving people, They just love to have peace in their relationships and peace around themselves, and very often they actually even want to be just left in peace and do whatever they want to do. Which is why very often you will see also displacement people who, when they're in some difficult relationship, when with one of their friends or with somebody from their family, they would actually rather just cut this relationship, like the sun would do, and have peace rather than keep going in that and just keep suffering. So these are the people who won't really actually sacrifice their own peace of mind, and they won't sacrifice their own happiness very often for others. They might sacrifice that for some higher goal, very often spiritual goal, but most likely they won't actually sacrifice it for others, because they know that it's in a way pointless, So this is why sometimes they might be perceived as a little bit selfish as well. So that was just my short video about Sun in the third house and Sun in the sign of Gemini, which assumes the form of Mitra Aditya, so Sun as the divine friend. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Adityas or the Sun-gods, you have a couple of more videos on my channel. I am still doing them, so not all of them are ready yet. I am also writing now another ebook, which is going to be about Adityas, and which is most likely going to be like really, really long, because I had like first 2 chapters so far, and each of them is like 40 pages long. So it's going to be really, really detailed ebook about not only about the Adityas, but generally how the sun behaves in certain houses and what certain houses like originally stand for, because there are also like many misconceptions about it in Vedic astrology in general. So if you're interested in that, you can also pre-order my ebook. You have the link below. Or if you are interested also in learning with me more, I am also having bi-monthly webinars on Patreon when we are talking about tithis, nakshatras, and all other things in Vedic astrology. Usually just the community is actually choosing the topic. So if you are interested in that, you're also most welcome to participate. And I think that's all for me for today. So thank you so much for your attention and see you next time. Namaste.